Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 mini series with the Los Angeles Angels. And we are still at the start of the 2027 to 28 offseason. This is probably going to be a relatively quick episode just because I feel kind of stuck here. Normally, if you've followed me over the years, I'd like to kind of do some trades and make some definitive decisions to kind of fill some positions where there are holes at the start of the offseason. But the issue with this Angels team is that we're just kind of top heavy organizationally. We've got a handful of players that I love on the major league roster and a handful of prospects that I really don't want to get rid of that are pretty much the only guys in our organization who have any significant value. We're in a situation right now where we've got a full 40-man roster, and we are pretty soon going to be heading for the Rule 5 draft when there's at least one guy that we're going to want to add to the roster in David Mershon, third baseman, 24-year-old, who was about a league average offensive player in AAA for us this year, but is versatile defensively, has good speed, and looks like he could be a decent contact hitter and draw some walks. So kind of envisioning him, since he'll be making the major league minimum next year if he is on the 40-man roster, as a potential replacement as a utility infielder for Brooks Lee, who's starting to get somewhat expensive, although still not inconceivable that Brooks Lee will be back with us next year. We have made one trade that I'll talk about right now. It's not all that exciting, but we got a guy who we hope can help our bullpen a little bit, the 28-year-old reliever Cade Smith. He's another guy who looks really good on paper, but he's been pretty meh over the course of his major league career so far. I guess that's not fair. He's coming off a bad year with a 73 ERA plus, and 2 years ago he had an 85 ERA plus. But his FIP minus has consistently been better than average. It's just after that incredible first season he had in 2024 with a 1.91 ERA and a 2.7 WAR. He's put up a 4.68 ERA, a 3.06, and a 5.54 ERA the last 3 years with 0.7, 0.5, and 0.3 WAR. So he definitely seems to be a guy who is tempting me with his ratings, but probably ultimately isn't quite as good as he looks. But still felt a 28-year-old who's set to make around $3 million in arbitration, throws in the mid to high 90s, and certainly has some tools, was worth trying to bring on board to help our bullpen. Had to give up a couple of decent prospects for him. The 25-year-old minor league starting pitching prospect Ryan Johnson split last year between AA and AAA, where he was a combined 14-7. Great 1.80 ERA in AA. Was much more pedestrian with a 4.32 ERA in AAA, but still put up a 3.5 WAR. Don't love that his control is below average. Certainly looks like he could be a competent fourth or fifth starter, but I don't love guys who walk a ton of people, and I think that's potentially an issue going forward with Johnson, and he's not so great that I wasn't willing to include him. And then also had to include minor league outfielder Justin Thomas, who put up a 129 WRC plus with 13 homers and 44 ribbies and 290 AA at-bats last year after we promoted him from high A ball. Got some speed, decent defensively, but the bat looks very borderline for a major leaguer at best. So didn't really mind giving up these two guys to bring Cade Smith on board. who knows? It's possible if the offseason goes really well that Cade Smith's fighting to have a roster spot next year, given how toolsy he is, though, and the fact that the potential free agent pools don't look all that interesting, and he seemed to be by far the most attainable reliever for us in the trade market. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up starting the season off as our closer either. So we'll see what happens there. I mentioned that the upcoming free agent pools aren't particularly impressive. There is a fair amount of good relievers coming, including a couple we're familiar with, John Duran and Sam Hentges off our team, and then Luke Weaver, our former closer, also a potential free agent. But all of these guys are looking for, 10, 15, close to $20 million a year to work in the bullpen for us, which is more than I'd like to pay, ideally. Starting pitching, less of a need than it used to be for us after we've made some trades. But the class there is definitely got some hair on it. Chris Sale, 38 years old, fragile as far as his injury proneness, selfish in the locker room. Tyler Glass now coming off an injury, so we're low scouting accuracy, outspoken and fragile. Jacob deGrom, obviously fragile. Zach Wheeler, normal as far as his injury proneness, but he's 37 years old and still looking for over $20 million. And then Ronaldo Lopez might be the most interesting of the bunch based on the fact that he's the youngest of the top starters out there at age 33. But he's also looking for about $25 million a year. So I don't know that there's any obvious answers there for us. And again, we feel with the pitching staff we've got now with Schellenbach, Bradley, King, and Scott, we've kind of got 4 positions that we feel real good about. We'd like to, upgrade our 5th starter from Corbin Burns, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get out of that contract. Actually, we are able to get out of that contract. It's just that we can't get much of anything valuable in return. So we may end up moving on from Burns just to save a little bit of money. But I don't know that we need to go crazy bringing a 5th starter on board unless it's someone we really love, because we got a lot of guys in their mid-20s that have been up and down between the majors and AAA the last few years that we could potentially have fill that role next year as well. And then when we look at the batters who are available next year, Candelario, probably the best one out there. But a first base, third base type, going to be looking for a lot of money. Did put up a big 130 WRC plus this year with 40 home runs, so he remains a very productive offensive player. But at age 34, just not confident how much I really want to be paying him upwards of $20 million a year. And then outside of him, you can see it's a lot of guys looking for 6, 8, 10, 12, $15 million. Not a lot of difference makers on the market. We'll probably end up signing somebody that we think can help us. But I just don't see any real impact players out there, and we are going to potentially have some money to spend, particularly when you think about our arbitration situation, because there's a lot of guys I'm very willing to move out from. You can see we've obviously made offers to several people: Schwellenbach, Scott, lefty reliever Garrett McDaniels, righty reliever Colin Snyder, righty reliever Ryan Walker, new addition Cade Smith, and third baseman Addison Barger. But we've got a number of pitchers in their late 20s that could be 5th starters for us that I'm just not in love with. Rosny Contreras, Reed Detmers, Jorge Soriano among them. And then I mentioned Brooks Lee earlier as someone whose roster spot is in jeopardy, and Kind of feel the same about Logan O'Hoppe, Dylan Cruz, and Nolan Shawnrell. All decent players, but not really impact players at this point. And some of them are starting to get expensive. So we have been perusing the trade market. We hoped and thought, and I know that some of you know this from discussions in the comment section, that Logan O'Hoppe, with a bat that did hit 31 homers the year before last, and the fact that he can play catcher, might have some trade value. And he does have the most trade value out of that crew of O'Hoppe, Nolan, Corbin Burns, etc., that we'd love to get off of the 40-man roster and love to not be paying next year. But at the trade settings we're playing on, there's just really no one all that interesting that we can get in return for Hoppy. The most interesting to me was Kyle Manzardo from the Guardians. Awful defensively, so he's going to have to be a DH. But he is a left-handed hitter with a pretty good profile against right-handed pitching. But he's also another one of these guys who, similar to Cade Smith, is just coming off of a disastrous season. And it's a guy who's 27, going to be turning 28 next year. And this is actually a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It almost seems like there might be a little bit more of a disparity between the scouted ratings that we're seeing in OOTP 26 and how people are performing. And I do like that. Makes things a little more interesting, and you have to analyze the stats a little more rather than just looking at the batting ratings. But Manzardo, for his career, a 107 WRC plus, a one-WAR player, and he's going to be making $2.4 million next year. And again, kind of going to be stuck at being a DH for us because Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s got the first base spot down. And then we look at O'Hoppe, and he's put up an average one WAR a season for his career. Not as good offensively in terms of his WRC plus, but has in the past brought some value defensively, thanks to being able to play catcher, although he's played a lot of DH for us these last few years where he's ended up with those negative WARs. Manzardo is also a guy that I could pick up for Nolan. I don't think I could get him straight up for Corbin Burns, but most of those other guys have even less impressive lists of players that we could pick up than the ones that I'm talking about here. Jaden Hill, a 27-year-old, soon-to-be 28-year-old reliever, ground baller, throws in the high 90s. I like that. Again, a guy whose profile looks like he might be a pretty interesting right-handed reliever. But he's been in the majors for parts of 4 seasons now with an 87 ERA plus and a 125 FIP minus. Almost a win below replacement for his career. Pitching in Colorado, so it could certainly be different somewhere else. But a guy in his late 20s, like O'Hoppe, who in theory has some untapped power and can still play catcher for us in a pinch. As much as I don't necessarily want to be playing O'Hoppe close to $8 million next year, kind of was hoping the return for a guy who can play catcher and who hit over 30 homers just a year ago and is not 28 years old yet would be a little higher than it has been. So because of that, Just haven't found out any trades that I'm all that excited to potentially proceed with yet. And as I mentioned, a lot of arbitration decisions as well. Detmers, and this is kind of scary. He essentially has no trade value at this point. This is a guy who was a all-star, 10-8 with a 3.16 ERA, led the league in BAB up against for us in our first season in 2025. Last year, split the season between AAA Salt Lake and the majors, and he was pretty brutal at both levels. Set to make over $7.5 million in arbitration next year, and as I said, he essentially has no trade value, which makes me think the right decision with him is probably just to zero things out right here and not guarantee him a contract next year and let him hit free agency. I could see us trying to bring Contreras back as a swing man, potentially a fifth starter if we do end up trading Burns. Soriano, I think I'm a little less constructive on, even though he was relatively productive for us a few years ago. Actually, each of the last couple years, he was a 1.1 WAR player and then a 2.9 WAR player a year ago, but split the year between the majors and AAA this year and was not particularly effective in the majors, going 4-6 with a ERA in the mid-5s as a starter for us. And he's set to be making about $5.5 million next year. If we wanted him as our fifth starter, probably would bring him back at that level. But I think I prefer Contreras for a bit more money. And I don't know if I want to be spending $5.5 million on a guy who's going to be a long reliever and a occasional starter for us if we have some injury issues. Talked about O'Hoppe and Lee, Cruz and Nolan. Probably will end up bringing at least one of them back. Might even bring both of them back. They are kind of a interesting potential platoon in left field. Have the left-handed hitting Nolan playing against righties, and then the right-handed hitting Cruz playing against lefties and hopefully performing better than he did for us when he came over this year. Cruz a little better defensively. Nolan's a little better offensively. They're both still relatively young, but between the two of them, we're spending about $7.5 million to get meh production out of left field, which in theory should be a spot that we have a really big bat producing for us in. Pending free agents, Joe Adele, Willie Castro, both looking for way more than we want to pay, but certainly not going to submit QOs to either of them. And then the big relievers we talked about, Duran and Hentges, both ready to hit free agency, no compensation for them. Don't think we're leaning towards spending $15-20 million to bring either of them back at this point. I think, honestly, our best hope is that there is a international free agent who blows me away and we've got a lot of money to spend on. Would love it if it was a corner outfielder. Always would love it if it was a starting pitcher, but if there's a great player out there, we can find a spot for him. But I'm just not feeling it in the trade market right now and really not all that excited about the upcoming free agent pool. So I've been spending a lot of time offline the last couple of days trying to figure which direction to go with this team. Certainly want to continue building on the 94-win season that we just had. But there's just not a obvious path forward that's really got me all that intrigued quite yet. So something I got to keep thinking about. And obviously, if any of you have seen anything or have any ideas, share them in the comments down below, and I'll certainly think about going in a direction that perhaps I haven't considered yet. One thing that was mentioned in the comments to the last episode, both Gene C and Jack Hammer Possessor talking about this owner goal to acquire a Cy Young Award winner. Certainly wish we had that one a year ago when we brought Corbin Burns on board, given that we're already trying to get out from under that contract. But we could have certainly at least gotten the credit from the owner for doing that. But no opportunity to, unfortunately, negotiate the high importance extension of Sam Hentges, which, again, I just not inclined to pay a reliever close to $15 million a year. He's a good lefty reliever, and he was excellent for us after we brought him over. Just seems like out of principle I can't justify that, but no way to swap out of that. But interestingly, there is a way to swap out of the Cy Young Award winner, and it's actually something interesting. Wants us to upgrade center field, so I think that's one to certainly consider, because if you've been following us, you know that we've got Mr. Andres Rodriguez in AAA, who we drafted 6th overall a year and a half ago, who should be our center fielder of the future. So that seems like a goal that we can probably hit pretty easily. So I'm strongly considering switching to that goal since it's much more realistic. Would become a high priority. My only concern is just I'm still not 100% confident that I am going to have Rodriguez on the major league roster right when the season gets underway. And if I don't do that, and why can I not find Mr. Rodriguez here? I'll go into player development, find him. Seems like he should be listed in AAA. Maybe I'm just going blind. I've thought that I may not bring Rodriguez up till the mid or late part of next year and just hope that he would put up enough WAR while we've got him on the major league roster that he's still viewed as an upgrade over Mr. McRae. And one of the things that hopefully will help us ultimately make the decision as to when we bring Rodriguez up and whether we want to discuss changing that goal is how things go in the development lab. So we'll finish up the episode talking about that, because that is something that we have made some decisions on. We're going to work on Andres Rodriguez trying to develop that power. We think it's untapped. It's a hard program to be successful at, but he's got a lot of positive personality traits. We've got a lot of good coaches. Hopefully we can make some progress there. We'll continue with the experiment with Jake Riley, who we picked 14th overall this year. We generally don't like players with a lot of negative personality traits, have trouble developing them, but we are going to sink some resources into the young starting pitcher, Mr. Riley, see if we can work on his control. A couple of other youngsters, Sean Gamble, who was our first-round pick back in 2025, and then David Mershon, who we talked about could be a utility infielder next year, both working on their two-strike approach. And then we'll turn to some major leaguers with the last 6 spots that we've got. The young catcher, Juan Flores, is going to work on his plate discipline. Volpe and Nolan both going to work on their bat speed. And obviously, I mentioned not 100% sure that I'm going to bring Nolan back. But if we decide not to, might swap someone else into the development lab for him, obviously. But right now, I think I'm leaning towards bringing him back. We think there's a little bit of untapped power potential there. And he's been good for us the last 2 years with 120 WRC pluses, playing in kind of a platoon role for us. It's just that we've had Ohapi at DH and Guerrero at first. So we've had to play him in left field frequently, where he's pretty bad butcher with a minus 12.2 zone rating and 865 defensive efficiency this past year. And then also 3 important pitchers, Taj Bradley working on control, and then Schwellenbach and the lefty reliever Garrett McDaniels both working on secondary pitch improvement. So that is the initial plan here in the development lab for this 2025 to 2020 or 2027 to 2028 offseason. Don't know why I'm still talking 2025. So I'm going to continue to spend some time offline seeing if there's something I might want to do in the trade market, but I just don't think there's anything all that compelling right now. One other guy that I have looked at, I guess I'll mention it before I finish the episode since this isn't all that exciting an episode, is Matt Wallner of the Twins. I kind of think he could help, but then I think about what we have with Nolan, and I don't really know that he's all that different. Still a guy with below average range. All in all, he's a little bit better in left field than Nolan is. Left-handed hitter is going to be making $6 million next year. He has put up a 120 WRC plus over the course of his career, average of 2 WAR a season. But he's going to be turning 30 shortly, doesn't bring anything to the table defensively, and kind of viewing him as a guy who would play against right-handed pitching as a platoon guy, as a corner outfielder, potentially a first baseman or a DH. But as I talked about, between Guerrero Jr., between O'Hoppe, between Nolan, even when you throw in guys like the youngster Lugo, Dylan Cruz, we've just got a lot of guys who are corner outfielders that aren't that exciting, and Wallner, to me, kind of fits the bill there. He's also pretty expensive. The only ones we can get him for straight up would be Bradley, Guerrero, Neto, Schwellenbach, or Volpe. I've looked into some trades where we can kind of send 3 or 4 guys to the Twins to pick up Wallner. And it's just not all that exciting to me. And I also just don't know that he's really going to be a huge impact guy for us. I mentioned he's got a 120 career WRC plus as a middling defensive left fielder. Well, as we talked about, Nolan's put up 120 WRC pluses exactly the last couple seasons as a very middling defensive left fielder. And he's set to be making a little bit less money next year. And we're not going to have to trade away a big package or one of the top players in our organization to get Nolan since he's already here, which we'd have to do with Wallner. So just kind of feeling like there's not a lot for me to do, unfortunately. And I'd like to be more active, but just not seeing any path to anything all that interesting other than, letting myself, make a trade for the sake of making a trade and likely overpaying, which just doesn't excite me that much. So if you've got ideas on what we should think about doing, would love to hear them. Hopefully next time around we'll actually start moving forward towards free agency, find out how award season goes, and ultimately make some decisions on those last few arbitration eligible players, and certainly think about the trade market as well. So apologies for a quick episode, apologies for an episode where not all that much really happened, but I'm just kind of at an impasse here, and we'll figure out which direction to go next time around. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.